Well, hello. Today we're going to be continuing our review of Murray Bookchin's book, Social Anarchism or Lifestyle Anarchism. In my previous video, I went through his essay, which is included in the book, called The Left That Was, and Bookchin was basically talking about how the left lost some of its traditional values that, the values that make the left, well, the left. And he links that decline in the values of the left with the emergence of what he calls lifestyle anarchism, which is the kind of anarchism that kind of took over the face of anarchism, and it is a kind of anarchism that Bookchin rejects, and for very good reasons, and that's what we are going to see today. So if you have people nowadays who dismiss anarchism as irrational, as abstract, as utopist, well, they are right, because the anarchists who took over the movement during the time of Bookchin didn't really serve well the movement of anarchism. They even distorted the doctrines of anarchism and replaced it with some primitivist New Age spirituality and thoughtless transgressive acts that have no revolutionary impact. So already head on with the first page of the book. Bookchin starts with a note to the reader in which he explains what went wrong with anarchism. And so he says that throughout the 20th century, the West has known crisis after crisis, which led the masses to completely distrust their governments. And so in an anarchist paradigm, that would be the perfect opportunity for anarchism to win the approval of the masses, since anarchism's main target is the state, is the government. So anarchists were expected to come to the foreground and suggest plans and ideas of social organization that would compete with governmental organization. But that didn't happen. As Bookchin says, anarchists have formed neither a coherent program nor a revolutionary organization to provide a direction for the mass discontent that contemporary society is creating. And because anarchists failed to do that, because they failed to give direction to the discontent of the masses, that discontent was given direction by the same people who caused the crisis and the discontent in the first place. So in short, the government jumped in to direct that frustration that it caused towards scapegoats. Like government be like, I know you don't trust the government because the government let you down, and you're right, the government did let you down because of immigrants, and because of minorities, and because of single moms, and because of lazy people milking welfare, So in other words, when the anarchists failed to get to the masses, the right-wing propaganda and the government stepped in. Quote, this discontent is being absorbed by political reactionaries and channeled into hostility towards ethnic minorities, immigrants, and the poor and marginal, such as single mothers, the homeless, the elderly, and even environmentalists who are being depicted as the principal sources of contemporary social problems. So according to Bookchin, this failure wasn't due to some sort of external boycott or pressure, but that anarchism itself is responsible for its own failure because it chose not to care about the masses, not to care about social planning, and instead they prefer to cut themselves off from the social world and focus on simply their own pleasures and lifestyle. Quote, thousands of self-styled anarchists have slowly surrendered the social core of anarchist ideas to the all-pervasive yuppie and new age personalism that marked this decadent bourgeoisified era. So they literally privileged a bourgeois lifestyle, which is normally the thing against which anarchism exists, because lifestyle anarchists turns out to be bourgeois wannabe. They want a life that revolves around themselves, around their own ego, and do not care about the social and political state of the world. As long as they are satisfied, the social can just beat it. Quote, they are no longer socialists, the advocates of a communal-oriented libertarian society, and they eschew any serious commitment to an organized, pragmatically coherent social confrontation with the existing order. So they are exhibiting what the sociologist Russell Jacoby called a social amnesia, where people seem to be forgetful of their existence as part of social relations and social structures. It is like it's like they live as if there is no society at all, no material conditions or material distribution of power across populations. And so Bookchin portrays this in the way that these anarchists express their thought. For example, quote, they have followed the largely middle-class trend of the time into a decadent personalism in the name of their sovereign autonomy, a quasi-mysticism in the name of intuitionism, and pre-lapsarian vision of history in the name of primitivism. So they basically reject civilization, that's what this quote means, and they want to return to the idea of the noble savage, which of course Rousseau never advocated for. Many people would think that Jean-Jacques Rousseau wanted us to return to a state of nature, but he never said that. He said that once we're out of that state of nature, there is no coming back to it. So Rousseau is kind of a champion of a social contract, and you can't have social contracts in states of nature. So lifestyle anarchists do, on the other hand. Okay, they want to return to that primitivist state. Take the example of what they say about technology. When they want to deal with technological oppression, their target isn't capitalism or the structure of redistribution or production. The problem for them isn't that technology is used to generate profit for some while exploiting the many. The problem for them is technology itself. To quote Bookchin, capitalism itself has been mystified by many self-styled anarchists into an abstractly conceived industrial society, and the various oppressions that inflicts upon society have been grossly imputed to the impact of technology, not the underlying social relationships between capital and labor structured around an all-pervasive marketplace economy that has penetrated into every sphere of life, from culture to friendship to family. So what happens is that these anarchists de-responsibilize the bourgeoisie, since this is bourgeois thinking, that you want to find causes for oppression outside the power relationships is just a way for the bourgeoisie to say that they are not responsible for it, right? The problem isn't that the bourgeoisie is exploiting the working class. The problem is just, technology itself. So the further removed you are from the social relations of power, the closer you are to attributing oppression or social ills to weird and abstract things. Like Bookchin says, to root the ills of society in civilization rather than in capital and hierarchy, in the mega machine rather than in the commodification of life, and in shadowy simulations rather than the very tangible tyranny of material want and exploitation, is not unlike bourgeois apologias for downsizing in modern corporations today as the product of technological advances rather than of the bourgeoisie's insatiable appetite for profit. So it is an excellent introduction. This little note to the reader, because it starts with addressing the problem that anarchism is facing. Like, there is a schism between what Bookchin calls the social anarchism, which is the anarchism that Bookchin champions, that one, the one that demanded, quote, a revolution, a social revolution, without which these aesthetic and psychological goals could not be achieved for humanity as a whole. And on the other side, you have lifestyle anarchism, which is the anarchism that he criticizes and rejects. So later he explained that social anarchism is about freedom, which is for everyone and is achieved collectively, while the lifestyle anarchism is about autonomy, which is the individual's ability to do whatever they want without anything interfering with that autonomy. And so, as the title of the book suggests, we are at a time where we have to choose one or the other. And this choice is critical for Bookchin because depending on which anarchism we'll choose, the entire fate of anarchist political thought is at stake. So if lifestyle anarchism becomes the face of anarchy, then Bookchin argues there won't be any anarchism anymore. Anarchism would simply be a chic word to say for a bourgeois dandy who just wants to offend their entourage with their originality and eccentricities. Quote, "The revolutionary and social goals of anarchism are suffering far-reaching erosion to a point where the word anarchy will become part of the chic bourgeois vocabulary of the coming century, naughty, rebellious, insouciant, but deliciously safe." So it is safe in the sense that it poses no threat to capitalism or to the government, as long as it is bourgeois who are transgressive. The status quo is maintained for two reasons. First, bourgeois people can afford to be transgressive, and second, they have no plan for social organization that involves no hierarchy or unjust power relations. So Bookchin starts his essay by telling us that throughout anarchism's history, there were two tendencies at odds with each other: a personalistic commitment to individual autonomy and a collectivist commitment to social freedom. So none of which have been reconciled with the other. Instead, these two views simply coexisted with each other and often clashed with each other. On the one hand, anarchists claim that the autonomy of the individual should be regarded as sacred, and therefore the autonomy should never be subordinated to a community or a collective. On the other, the freedom of the collective is seen as more important than the personal autonomy of individuals. So from the start, from the very beginning of anarchism, we have we have an idea of where lifestyle anarchism stems from and where social anarchism originates from. One professes the sovereignty of the individual's autonomy. The other gives priority to collective freedom. If there is, however, one thing that brings them together, is that both see the state, the embodiment of see in the state. They both see the state as the violation of freedom and autonomy. Okay, like that's the only thing that they agree about. The state is bad because it impedes my personal freedom, my personal autonomy, as well as the freedom of the collective. But that's kind of the only thing that they agree about. When it comes to what kind of society should we have instead, like in a post-state society, there we won't hear much from any of them. Quote, "Within anarchism as a minimalist credo of opposition to the state rather than a maximalist credo that articulated the kind of new society that had to be created in its place." So this issue at heart, the issue at heart that causes these two tendencies to clash are inherent within the anarchist definition of freedom. Anarchists, for most of their history, have defended a negative kind of freedom. Anarchism as a whole advanced what Isaiah Berlin has called negative freedom, that is to say, formal freedom from rather than a substantive freedom to. So this means that as long as I am not harming anyone, we're of course talking about harm. I'm not causing some discomfort. So as long as I'm not causing harm, and what I am doing is rational, well, nobody of power can stop me from doing what I am doing. Okay, this is basically what negative freedom is. And so the most famous formulation of individual anarchism came from a guy called Max Stirner and his book The Ego and Its Own. He basically says that my ego is, well, it is everything because my ego is unique. Egos are unique. Stirner doesn't see the ego like we see it today, just as a a self-image that is, you know, that is bad, that we have to abandon. It's more like it's the thing that makes me me. So it is about my integrity, and it is also the only thing that I truly possess. Like my ego is all that I have. So for Stirner, the ego is its own property, and it is unified, and therefore anything that would compel the ego into a coercive situation that it did not choose of its own free will would be a violation of the uniqueness of the ego. So in other words, you cannot force the ego to do whatever it doesn't want to do without violating its unicity. And so while Stirnerian anarchism was criticized by other anarchists who held more socialist views, but still they viewed that any form of coercion is incompatible with anarchistic freedom. So hence the famous formulation about tyranny from household names like Pierre-Joseph Proudhon and William Godwin, as quoted in Bookchin's book. Proudhon's famous declaration that whoever puts his hand on me to govern me is an usurper and a tyrant. I declare him my enemy. Strongly tilts towards a personalistic negative freedom. And William Godwin's distinctly individualistic declaration, there is but one power to which I can yield a heartfelt obedience, the decision of my own understanding, the dictates of my own conscience. So both Proudhon and Godwin, whenever a coercive power tries to look over one's own conscience, is by nature authoritative. So this, of course, is to be regarded within its context. Godwin was primarily concerned with religious authority, in which, you know, religion would impose beliefs that don't make sense for the individual. Therefore, if people understand things differently, whatever violates that understanding is also something that violates someone's own conscience and sense of self. In the case of Proudhon, it is not religious authority per se, but political authority, which takes away what belongs to everyone to make it the property of the few, and impose a worldview in which taking away what everyone else needs can be somehow moral. And so that's basically about his famous assertion that property is theft. But these statements about the refusal to bow to an authoritative entity had its own problems. It came to be the target of a lot of criticism in anarchism about its incoherence. Can you have a coherent description of society, of a society of negative freedom? And so the main issue was that Proudhon's and Godwin's premises about not bowing to authority is supposed to guarantee social freedom for everyone. But how can you move from one's own freedom, one's own autonomy, to the freedom of the collective without jeopardizing the individual's freedom? So as Bookchin writes, Godwin's appeal to the authority of his own understanding and conscience, like Proudhon's condemnation of the hand that threatens to restrict his liberty, gave anarchism an immense individualistic thrust, which is hard to reconcile with the goals of a libertarian society. How are you even going to work out conflict and disagreements if you don't enforce some laws or coercion at some point? And so many theorists in anarchism suggested model of what an anarchist society would look like. And so Bookchin goes through each one of them, starting with Proudhon himself, who attempted to formulate a fairly concrete image of libertarian society based on contracts, essentially between small producers, cooperatives, and communes. Proudhon's visions was redolent of the provincial craft world into which he was born. So Proudhon was from a rural background, which was marked by artisanry. People had skills when it comes to all sorts of craft and farming, and therefore he theorized that these artisans could form some sort of guilds in which they can all agree to have their needs met freely and without coercion. This is like you have the free right to associate yourself with whomever you please, and you can break off any bond whenever you want, depending on the nature of the contract, of course. So the terms of the association is left to the individuals to agree upon based on their rationality, trust, moral sentiment, and their needs. So this, however, isn't satisfying because although Proudhon and Godwin share the same disdain towards authority, their concepts of morality and ethics were a bit different regarding, for example, women. Whereas Godwin had a more feminist and egalitarian view of the relationship between the sexes, Proudhon was a full-on misogynist and phallocratic. So as Bookchin says, his attempt to meld a patronist, often patriarchal notion of liberty with contractual social arrangements was lacking in depth. So, and this lack of depth manifested itself in this seemingly hypocrisy of, on the one hand, he refuses to yield to authority, but then when it comes to women's freedom, the tyranny he rejects suddenly doesn't apply anymore. It also manifests itself into another problem within the contractual social agreements that Proudhon based his society upon, and that is the lack of guarantee that everyone will have their needs met. One of the criticism is that Proudhon's society is pretty bourgeois, since it acts as if people are not living in need and all have the same abilities, right? It acts like there are no inequalities between people that will force some people to consent to things that they wouldn't have consented to otherwise, and that it can also allow people not to associate with those who need it because, well, they don't feel like it, right? So imagine, for example, someone who desperately needs a job, but no one is there to hire him. Everyone tells them that they already have enough staff, that they don't need their services. So the people who refuse to hire you or buy your services have the right not to, right? They are free to associate and not associate with you. But as a result, you either starve or you look for jobs that are demeaning and won't make ends meet. So the people Proudhon and Godwin talk about are people who can afford to choose who they want to associate with. Many people don't have that luxury, and therefore they cannot be free. And even worse, their chains are a direct result of the freedom of the bourgeoisie. To quote Bookchin, the craftsmen, cooperative and commune relating to one another on bourgeois contractual terms of equity or justice rather than on the communist terms of ability and needs reflected the artisan's bias for personal autonomy, leaving any moral commitment to a collective undefined beyond the good intentions of its members. So in short, it's a bit of a risk to leave moral commitment to communities as a matter of just good intentions, but intentions don't have much to do with needs and abilities, right? This is, for example, exactly what is happening in the United States, in which, property rights and rights of, free enterprise trump all attempts at promoting social freedom. You can think, for example, of when people refuse to hire someone because of their skin color or because of their, sexuality or gender. That can technically be justified under the slogan of a free enterprise. I have the right to free I have the right to free association, and so I don't want my company to be associated with black people, for example. So during the civil rights movement, one of the most popular ways to solve this problem was to say that anyone who is a racist, is stupid, because being racist is bad for your business. You are restricting even more, your clients. So in that sense, you can have free enterprise, but not only you're limiting your clientele, but you're also limiting people you can work with, who will go buy the products and work with and for a competitor, and you'll have to close shop. That's Milton Freedman's argument to save capitalism, but I mean, quite recently, you know, Jordan Peterson made a similar comment. It was a few years ago about, you know, people not having. I mean, it was about a bakery. There was a bakery who refused to bake a wedding cake for a homosexual couple, and Jordan Peterson was like, well, I mean, they have the right to do that. I mean, it's their enterprise. You cannot force them to bake a cake for a homosexual couple. So just to tell you that, you know, that. Just to show you how bad the free enterprise stuff can be. So it is the same thing with bigots. Yeah? I mean, should someone be fired if they expressed political commitments that are offensive, racist, or sexist? Well, the free enterprise gives you the right to do so. But you can see the problem. If your society is racist and sexist, then you won't really run risks of losing your business, right? I mean, if the free enterprise can make us get rid of bigots, that's because you have to wait for bigots to be the actual minority. And that transition is less the product of the free enterprise than of social movements who challenge the negative freedom on which the free enterprise is based. So this model of anarchism does not guarantee the freedom of everyone. To think that mutualism and social contract between free individuals, whatever that means, can guarantee freedom is just a myth. And so, as one of the household names in social anarchism, Bakunin, puts it, how ridiculous are the ideas of the individualist of the Jean-Jacques Rousseau school and of the Proudhonian mutualists who conceive society as a result of the free contract of individuals absolutely independent of one another and entering into mutual relations only because of the convention drawn up among men. As if these men had dropped from the skies, bringing with them speech, bringing with them speech, will, original thought, and as if they were alien to anything of the earth, that is, anything having social origins. Hence, the others took on the tasks of finding a coherent model. The others are the social anarchists. They were trying to find a coherent model between individual and social freedom. And so Bookchin mentions two great figures of social anarchism, already Bakunin, but also Kropotkin, who viewed that the kind of freedom championed by Proudhon and Godwin are not guaranteeing the freedom of all. To quote Bookchin, by contrast, Michel Bakunin and Peter Kropotkin held essentially collectivist views, in Kropotkin's case explicitly communist ones. So the collectivist view that Bakunin holds, that individuals cannot overshadow society since they solely rely on it, like, you know, animals rely on nature, humans, they rely on society. Like from this, Bakunin ushers a political position that can puzzle some people, since he says that society antedates and at the same time survives every human individual, being in this respect like nature itself. It is eternal like nature, or rather, having been born upon our earth, it will last as long as the earth. A radical revolt against society would therefore be just as impossible for man as a revolt against nature. Human society being nothing else but the last great manifestation or creation of nature upon this earth. And an individual who would want to rebel against society would place himself beyond the pale of real existence. So society, therefore, is our nature, according to the social anarchist, and therefore we can't just state that society is a result of free or autonomous individuals, but rather free individuals are the result of a free society. Quote, even the most wretched individual of our present society could not exist and develop without the cumulative social efforts of countless generations. Thus, the individual his freedom and reason are the products of society and not vice versa. Society is not the product of individuals comprising it, and the higher, the more fully the individual is developed, the greater his freedom. And the more he is the product of society, the more does he receive from society, and the greater his debt to it. As for Kropotkin, he was perhaps the most collectivist of the bunch, and perhaps the most radical. He claimed that the individual freedom should move towards an organic social freedom, in which the freedoms would compound into a whole. So his naturalistic view of human beings and their sense of morality made it such that Kropotkin believed that when left without an authority to impose on them a certain limited and superstitious worldview, human beings' rational side will converge their freedom. So Kropotkin believed that morality is something that you are born with, and so any wrongdoing isn't much the individual's fault as much as the environment that limited his moral abilities. And what limits those moral abilities for rationality what limits those abilities for morality as much as for rationality, for Kropotkin it's private property and the state. Therefore, he calls for the radical abolition of private property and the state in the spirit of local and personal initiative and a free federation from the simple to the compound, in lieu of the present hierarchy from the center to the periphery. So his anarchism is different from Proudhon in the sense that he doesn't envision a society or artisans as opposed to a society of heavy industry and of radical technological progress. Rather, he sees in industrialism and technology the conditions for liberating people's potential. So if artisans can be free through their skills, people lacking in skills will not be able to live to their potential. So technology, on the other hand, can liberate the latent talent of individuals who are not artisans. And therefore, it can democratize the means of production for all and guarantee further autonomy and greater freedom for all. Quote, his anarcho-communism predicated on advances in technology and increased productivity recognized the need of periods of accelerated evolution, which are called revolutions, ultimately yielding a society based on federations of every township or commune of the local groups of producers and consumers. So Kropotkin became the face of what came to be known as anarcho-syndicalism. The emergence of the growing working class found itself more attracted to collectivist approaches than individualistic and egoistic ones. The individual anarchists were often viewed by the working class as bourgeois eccentrics, who know nothing of the working conditions. Worst of all, the egoistic and individualistic anarchists had a tendency of elitism, seeing themselves better than the herds of common men, of workers who think only of their comfort, to the point where they're ready to sacrifice their uniqueness and unicity for the collective. So needless to say that individual anarchism's popularity quickly fell out of working class movements and lost all appeal to revolutionary sentiment. As Bookchin writes, in the era of stormy social upheaval, marked by the rise of mass working class movement that culminated in the 1930s and the Spanish Revolution, anarcho-syndicalists and anarcho-communists, no less than Marxists, considered anarcho-individualism to be petty bourgeois exotica. They often attacked it quite directly as a middle-class indulgence rooted far more in liberalism than in anarchism. Thus, if the individual anarchist's view puts man's autonomy at odds with social freedom, then individual anarchism must be discarded as untenable. And even when some individual anarchists try to provide coherent theories of their views of how the unicity and uniqueness of individuals can be saved, while in collectivist bodies, they all were criticized by social anarchists soon they couldn't hold any coherence when it comes to how can you create an association that would even last. To quote Bookchin, no Stirnerite union of egoists, to my knowledge, ever rose to prominence, even assuming such a union could be established and survive the uniqueness of its egoistic participants. But it is important to note that in the case of Proudhon, he didn't really reject society like Stirner did, quite the opposite. It's just that there are contradictions, and I mean, he was aware of them. There were contradictions in his model for libertarian society, as expressed through his misogyny, for example, and that the free enterprise model can't work with social anarchism. So, individualistic anarchism, according to Bookchin, didn't bring didn't have that much popularity because, well, it only attracted individuals. I mean, since it is individualistic. Quote, anarcho-individualism attracted precisely individuals, from Benjamin Tucker in the United States to Federica Montsini in Spain. Nietzscheans like Emma Goldman remained cheek to jowl in spirit with individualists. Hardly any anarcho-individualist exercised an influence on the emerging working class. And so Bookchin attributes this failure of individual anarchism to the fact that they did not provide coherent social programs. That's the limit of focusing too much on individualism. Focusing on individuals without a full acknowledgement of social factors, what you end up with is just individual expression that doesn't think about transforming society. Quote, as a credo, individualist anarchism remained largely a bohemian lifestyle, most conspicuous in its demands for sexual freedom, free love, and enamored of innovations in art, behavior, and clothing. So, in other words, the individual anarchists are more preoccupied with their own freedom, their personal autonomy, than about theorizing possible social organization in which the freedom for all is guaranteed. And so Emma Goldman is surely right when she says that she doesn't want a revolution in which she cannot dance, but without social anarchism, only some individuals will have the luxury to dance, and those who don't, if they are individual anarchists, well, Bookchin holds them accountable for the bad reputation of anarchism today. So if we today, when we hear the word anarchism, we think about people who are looting and burning cars. It's not just a misconception. Some anarchists did commit terrorist crimes for the sake of their unique Stirnian ego. To quote Bookchin, in France, Spain, and the United States, individualistic anarchists committed acts of terrorism that gave anarchism its reputation as a violently sinister conspiracy. Those who blamed terrorists were less often libertarian socialists or communists. Those who became terrorists were often less libertarian socialists or communists than desperate men and women who used weapons and explosives to protest the injustices and Philistinism of their time, putatively in the name of propaganda of the deed. So, however, an explosion or shooting is just a matter of expression or of a deeply rooted frustration. It's like a slogan, a propaganda of deeds, rather than a social program. And not just that, it often targets people who are as oppressed as the ones who commit the crime, these terrorists' acts. So it also gives good reasons for people to grow distrustful of anyone who calls themselves anarchists. And the result is that anarchism loses all support from the public. It is either viewed as terrorism or as eccentrics who are resentful and are in need of attention. And so in both cases, individual anarchism is not going to attract those that it seeks as allies. And so the cultural expression of anarchists often comes at the expense of mocking the culture and behavior of the working class people as well. Most often, however, individual anarchist expressed itself in culturally defiant behavior. It to prominence in anarchism precisely to the degree that anarchists lost their connection with the viable public sphere. So this individual anarchism, as Bookchin argues, gained slowly the upper hand in anarchism in general. Despite being a minority at first, their voice soon became to dominate anarchist discussions and anarchist circles. So what came to matter now is how to emancipate the ego rather than society, which is, impossible according to Bookchin. This is the kind of anarchism he criticizes, one that is based on the lifestyle of the self-proclaimed anarchist and the aesthetic jouissance of being an eccentric. This I will call lifestyle anarchism. It's preoccupation with the ego and its uniqueness and its polymorphous concepts of resistance and steadily eroding the socialistic character of the libertarian tradition. So this is when, like, the bourgeoisie gets hooked on the revolutionary lifestyle, and it's become more a way to show your dad that that I exist rather than to be rationally involved within a social movement. Like, lifestyle anarchism is basically throwing a tantrum. Quote, ad hoc adventurism, personal bravura, and aversion to theory, oddly akin to the anti-rationalist rational biases of postmodernism, celebrations of theoretical incoherence like pluralism, and basically apolitical and anti-organizational commitment to imagination, desire, and ecstasy, and an intensely self-oriented enchantment of everyday life. So this is basically the hippie culture that dominated the world in the yuppie, and also hippie, since they are related. These cultures, they dominated the world after the 60s and a lot during the 80s. This is the new age spiritualism, the return to a primitive alternative lifestyle, the return of pseudoscience, scientific healing techniques and stuff like that. The kind of Zen therapy and acupuncture that you see everywhere, like even today. So there is a passage from Bookchin in which he quotes Katinka Matson. She's a psychologist who writes in the 1970s about the lifestyle anarchist trends as a remarkable change in the way we perceive ourselves in the world. The 1960s, she continues, saw a preoccupation with political activism, Vietnam, ecology, beings, communes, drugs, etc. Today we are turning inwards. We are looking for personal definition, personal improvement, personal achievement, and personal enlightenment. So these, according to Bookchin, are techniques that put the ego at ease, like, in a dream-like state, instead of being politically active, being a political activist in the sense of being active and committed to a cause through organization, criticism, planification, theory, etc. The self just needs something to make it forget the ills of society. And so if the ills of society are there, lifestyle anarchist seeks ways to make them disappear by adjusting their well-being. So if there is poverty, racism, gender discrimination, well, you can just go do some yoga instructions to find your inner peace. Or here's some paint, go write a tag on a wall to show how angry you are. So lifestyle anarchism basically becomes escapism. What is pursued in the activism of lifestyle anarchism isn't social change, but psychological well-being. It's like, opium in the Marxist sense of the word. And so no wonder lifestyle anarchism became widespread. At the same time, psychological therapy became widespread as well. Quote, psychotherapy in all its mutations cultivates an inwardly indirect self that seeks autonomy in a quiescent psychological condition of emotional self-sufficiency. Now the socially involved self denoted by freedom. In lifestyle anarchism, as in psychotherapy, the ego is counterposed to the collective, the self to society, the personal to the communal. So anarchism has now become a playground for juvenile journal Antiques. Nothing like, you know, the anarchism that aims at social commitments. Bookchin takes Michel Foucault as the prototype of lifestyle anarchism, since much of the individualistic anarchism of the 70s draws, you know, a lot from Foucault's critique of power. Like, Foucault understood human relations through power, and that power relies on social organization. As such, any social organization will lead to power and to hierarchies. So any attempts at formulating a coherent model of society that wouldn't involve someone getting the shorter end of the stick is kind of impossible now. Quote, Foucault fosters a perspective that resistance is never in a position of exteriority in relation to power. Hence, there is no single real universal locus of great refusal, no soul of revolution, source of all rebellions, or pure law of the revolutionary. So this leads Foucault to conclude that resistance isn't much obtained in rationality or in theory or in organization of movements, but in individual insurrection, in temporal, random, spontaneous, and irrational micro-resistance acts. Quote, many lifestyle anarchism articulate Michel Foucault's approach of personal insurrection rather than social revolution, premised as it is on an ambiguous and cosmic critique of power as such rather than on a demand for the institutionalized empowerment of the oppressed in popular assemblies, councils, and or confederations. Resistance must necessarily be a guerrilla war that is always present and that is inevitably defeated. So yeah, paradoxically, Foucault's position enters in a double bind. On the one hand, he critiques the institutionalization of power, of liberalism and capitalism. Capitalism and liberalism are predicated on the notion of the law of personal interest, that reality is made from the individuals, from the perspective of the individual self, and thus liberalism and capitalism are bound to create hierarchies. You know, but on the other hand, his conception of power gets so wide that it transcends the actual power of institutions and becomes some sort of cosmic force from which there is no escape other than the individual's desires and interests. So indeed, the solution that Foucault brings as resistance to this weird, perpetual, never-ending power struggle predicates itself on very similar axioms of liberalism. You know, quote, their ideological pedigree is basically liberal, grounded in the myth of the fully autonomous individual whose claims to self-sovereignty are validated by axiomatic natural rights, intrinsic worth, or on a more sophisticated level, intuited Kantian transcendental ego that is generative of all knowable reality, as if the universe turned on the choices of the self-oriented individual. So those are the core tenets of liberalism. It's like he's criticizing liberalism, like Foucault is criticizing liberalism, but at the same time, he's pleading for an even stronger liberalism, one that doesn't hide behind metaphysical fantasies of human nature or of grand narratives. Like whenever people start looking on a theory on which they can build better and more equal, free societies, Foucauldians would scream that that's fascism and that's hypocrisy. That behind theory there is just a will to power. So rationality, secularism, coherence theory, etc., all become a Trojan horse for power and totalitarianism. So Foucauldians, like lifestyle anarchists, have a disdain for theory with mystical and primitivist filiation that are generally too vague, intuitional, and even anti-rational to analyze directly. They are more properly symptoms than causes of the general drift towards a sanctification of the self as a refuge from the existing social malaise. So indeed, when power becomes cosmic, like in Foucault, the only valid option of resistance isn't resistance at all, but a refuge within oneself and a complete antagonism between the self and society at large. But put simply, we become narcissists because we find no other way to deal with power, or as we are told by, or so we are told by the Foucauldian lifestyle anarchists. So this narcissism, according to Bookchin, has its roots in a fundamental confusion in anarchists' concepts. It comes to no surprise that freedom is one of the most endearing concepts anarchists have. Like they love freedom, we love our freedom. Problem is, when you love something too much, you can start projecting yourself on it. Like when you love freedom, do you actually mean freedom, like substantial freedom, or are you talking of the kind of freedom that you daydream about? Like, are we talking about freedom, or are we talking about autonomy? Like you project your own autonomy and you take that as the same as freedom. So these two words can mean different things for social anarchists, and the whole mess we found ourselves into between lifestyle and social anarchists is the result of this confusion. Like, we confuse freedom with autonomy. So lifestyle anarchists simply confuse the two. They take autonomy as freedom, or that they don't see that both, even though different, they don't see that that most of the time they're contradictory. Like, the main difference between the two is that autonomy is about someone's autonomy. It is limited to the individual, whereas freedom is about the collective. It is the community's freedom that can confer and guarantee individuals' freedom or autonomy, for that matter. Like, if you want autonomy, that's fine, but you have to understand that without social freedom, your autonomy, doesn't mean anything. So Bookchin rejects the idea that there are such things as natural rights or natural freedoms. Whether they exist or not, they can only manifest themselves within social contexts. It is society that either creates them, that either creates those rights or those freedoms, or offers the conditions for those rights and those freedoms to be developed and experienced. This seems to be the premise that the lifestyle anarchist rejects or is unaware of. When lifestyle anarchists call for autonomy rather than freedom, they thereby forfeit the rich social connotations of freedom. So autonomy precisely means what is outside of social norms. It is like what you do in private, when in the private sphere you're technically allowed to do whatever you want and in the way you want to, right? So no one can intervene to stop you from doing what you want to do, or demand that you do it in a certain way. And so, according to Paul Goodman, for example, an individualistic anarchist, which Bookchin take as an example of autonomy, for me, the chief principle of anarchism is not freedom but autonomy, the ability to initiate a task and do it one's own way, a view worthy of an aesthete but not of a social revolutionary. So indeed, that's pure negative freedom there. Bookchin traces it to the concept of libertas in ancient Rome, wherein the untrammeled ego is free to own his personal property and to gratify his personal lusts. And so you have philosophers like Plato. They criticized autonomia in Greek as paradoxical. Autonomia means independency and self-sufficiency, which, according to Bookchin, connoting a self-managing ego independent of any clientage or reliance on others for its maintenance. Plato would have ironically called the master of himself a condition when the better principle of the human soul controls the worse. Even for Plato, the attempt to achieve autonomy through mastery of oneself constituted a paradox. For the master is also the servant, and the servant the master. And in all of these modes of speaking, the same person is predicated. So for Plato, it didn't make much sense for someone to be autonomous as independent or self-reliant to the point where they don't need others. Such behavior or belief was seen as hubris in the ancient world, an excessive pride or arrogance, and a danger to the survival of the polis, which means the city. Now, we can of course list countless instances where the freedom of the collective was used as a tool for unjustified oppression. It can be indeed a herd mentality that just sees any individual innovation or new ideas as a threat to its collective freedom. So it can be used as an excuse to maintain the status quo and even as a counter-revolutionary force. Like revolutionary ideas are always seen as eccentric, after all, even the social revolutionary ones. And so it is easy to dismiss whenever something threatens our comfort zone. It's easy to dismiss it as individualistic and anti-social. And so I will do videos in which I explore some of the individualistic anarchists in the future and reveal, their strength, but for the time being, we are going to criticize them. So we understand autonomy as just negative freedom on steroids, and therefore nothing should intervene with my autonomy, my self-sufficiency. So curiously, social anarchists see this position as contradictory, because autonomy would require that a certain body of legislation exists to protect or guarantee this autonomy. This, however, would be a state, and anarchists are against the state. It cannot be society that is protecting your autonomy, since individual anarchists ruled out society's involvement with our freedom. So the protection of such autonomy needs to be guaranteed by the state, unless we're looking at at a might makes right situation here. But this means that the strong will squash the autonomy of the weak, which is also what the state does. It just protects the autonomy of the powerful. So if we want to maximize the autonomy instead of freedom, we'll always be talking of the autonomy of some people and not of everyone's. Most will have to sacrifice their own autonomy for the sake of the few who get to enjoy their own autonomy. Okay? This doesn't mean that the intention of people like Stirner, Goodman, or Godwin is to have power over others. Quite the contrary, actually. They hope that everyone gets to enjoy their own autonomy. The problem is, whatever your intentions may be, all attempts of maximizing autonomy instead of freedom is bound to create a hierarchy in which some have autonomy while many others don't. So in contrast to autonomy, freedom dialectically interweaves the individual with the collective. When applied to the individual, freedom thus preserves a social or collective interpretation of that individual's origins and development as a self. In freedom, individual selfhood does not stand opposed to or apart from the collective, but is significantly formed in a rational in a rational society would be realized by his or her own social existence. Freedom thus does not subsume the individual's liberty, but denotes its actualization. So in other words, individual freedom depends on the freedom of the collective. In the autonomy model, we have the idea that autonomous individuals will lead to the freedom of the collective as an aggregate of independent units. In the freedom model, however, it's the other way around. Free individuals are the consequence of a free society. So freedom, therefore, doesn't see selfhood of individuals as opposed or in conflicts or at odds with society. Instead, this freedom stems from a commitment to emancipate freedom altogether, to transform it in in a way that freedom isn't just some potential, but it is an actuality. It is actualized. So in other words, we need to organize society in such a way that people, that everyone will find it easier to turn their freedom from a potentiality to a reality that they can enjoy. So Bookchin then goes to criticize specific lifestyle anarchists showing the incoherence, fallacies, and inconsistencies that their autonomy model results in. He focuses, for example, on Susan Brown. She's an anarchist, and her book is the politics of individualism, or POI. Let's call it POI. It is an example of the failure of autonomy, and Brown is kind of responsible for misconceptions that hinder her understanding of autonomy and freedom. From the start, Brown tries to articulate and elaborate a basically individualistic anarchism, yet retain some affiliations with anarcho-communism. But as Bookchin says, these two stances, individualist anarchism and anarcho-communism, are so incompatible with each other that at the end, Brown simply talks about anarcho-communism but ultimately defends individual anarchism. Like she mentions communism, she wants to achieve anarcho-communism, but at the end you end up with just individual anarchism. Her attempt simply becomes placing individual liberties on top of communities. So her goal is just individual autonomy, and because of that she is unable to explain how we move from individual autonomy to collective freedom. Quote, although anarchism's critique of private property and advocacy of free communal economic relations move Brown's anarchism beyond liberalism, it nonetheless upholds individual rights over and against those of the collective. In other words, it's just liberalism but with extra steps. This is made clear by the reasons of her defense of individualistic anarchism, which Brown calls existential anarchism. For her, collectivism always rejects the existence of individual autonomy in the sense that individuals' actions are carried by their own internal space, their intentions, and free will. So in short, she rejects determinism, the idea that human agency doesn't exist, and that human beings are the passive products of culture, economy, history, or society. So if we believe in determinism, she thinks, then we wouldn't respect people's autonomy, and therefore nothing provides the guarantee that human beings can live with dignity. Essentially, Brown dismisses collectivism, not just state socialism, but collectivism as such, with the liberal canard that a collectivist society entails the subordination of the individual to the group. And this is where Bookchin argues that Brown goes wrong. For Bookchin, Brown essentializes collectivism as such. It is all forms of collectivism that entail the subordination of the individual. And so we can call this a straw man fallacy, where you misrepresent deliberately or intentionally a position to easily dismiss it. Whereas it is true for Bolshevik states and Stalinism, Bookchin says that it is a mistake to think that all forms of collectivism leads to subordinate the individual to the will of an abstract group that doesn't really exist. That is literally Brown's position, as she explicitly says that a group is a collection of individuals, no more and no less. It has no life or consciousness of its own. So even though you can be right in seeing the danger of group thinking, the idea that they're all part of an organic whole in which personal minds must be subordinated to the mind of this weird whole, because a group never thinks by itself, right? It is the individuals that think within the group. So there is a genuine fear that collectivism ends up being an elite who thinks at your place, and whenever you rebel, they'll just tell you that you are breaking the group's mind or stuff like that, and so you are a nuisance. But on the other hand, we won't take neoliberal politicians as examples of freedom and respect for people's autonomies, right? Yet Brown's assertion clearly resembles Margaret Thatcher's notorious statement that there is no such thing as a society but only individuals. It attests to a positivistic, indeed naive, social myopia in which the universal is wholly separate from the concrete. So if we're going to be distrustful of collectivism to this degree because of Lenin and Stalin, why then can't we also be distrustful of autonomy to the same degree because of Ronald Reagan and Margaret Thatcher? Indeed, today what happens is more the revealing of the individualist rhetoric as reactionary. Whenever a group wants to unionize and work towards progress, its attempts are stopped by blaming them for subordinating the individual. An individual that is exactly like the abstract group that that the individualists are afraid of. So the result is giving to single individuals a power to veto that is too strong for them. Any social action can be thwarted just because one individual sees it as a threat to their own freedom. Like they're taking away, our burgers or stuff like that, so we have to stop the whole civil rights movement, So, as quoted by Bookchin, denigrating rational, discursive, and direct democracy, the democratic procedures for collective decision-making as dictating and ruling awards a minority of one sovereign ego the right to abort the decision of the majority. So what Bookchin is arguing for is not the tyranny of the majority as whatever majority decides, minorities must shut up and accept. We will see how Bookchin plays out the kind of society in which the subjectivity and interests of the minority are as much respected as the decisions of the majority in the next video. But for now, it is necessary to see that Brown's fear can be legit. We know throughout history, many times majority rule came at the expense of minorities who were vilified and demonized and called crazy, who then turned out to be right and were not doing anything immoral. But Brown's solution isn't much better because she argues that the group doesn't exist, that it is an abstract idea, an ideology used to squash the individuality and uniqueness of individuals, which, yes, it is immoral. Nonetheless, her depiction of the individual is itself a abstraction. Okay, and it is an ideological weapon also used to squash the possibility for social change, for groups to advance their demands for better living conditions and more democratic participation. So, like the social group that doesn't exist, the individual, free from any social or economic determinism, is also a fiction. So the autonomous individual that Brown and others are defending and promoting is then also an abstract idea, meaning that it bears no connection to the actual conditions that make them possible in the first place. So an individual without society is like a tree without roots, like a floating castle on whom gravity doesn't work. I mean, that is just a fiction. Quote, Brown herself creates an abstract individual. Minimally human existence presupposes the social and material conditions necessary for the maintenance of life, sanity, intelligence, and discourse, and the effective qualities Brown regards as essential for her voluntaristic form of communism, care, concern, and sharing. So how can you have those if the individual is held as an opposition to society? Why would they even care, show concern for one another, for others, or share with others if they owe nothing to anyone, right? If they don't see the products they consume, for example, as products and not as items from Amazon's, how can they care for the workers who made those products and often in inhumane conditions? Like nothing can compel you to care, right? Because now the only thing that matters, as Bookchin says, is their own disembodied pleasures. Quote, presumably complete unto themselves, they are, by dialectical inversion, immensely de-individualized for want or any aim beyond the satisfaction of their own needs and pleasures, which are often socially engineered today in any case. So Bookchin argues that it is crucial that individualism does not paint itself as opposed to collectivism. Just because we acknowledge the inner dimension and that individuals are self-motivated doesn't mean that we have to reject collectivism. As a matter of fact, Bookchin offers many examples of theorists whose collectivist ideas entail nothing of the totalitarian regimes that Brown alludes to, whether it is William Morris, Gustav Landauer, Robert Owens, Charles Fourier, Kropotkin, or even Marx himself. They all championed a libertarian society in which individual freedom wasn't subordinated to the collective, but was the result of the collective. So the Bookchinian account of the social need for individual freedom is closer to truth because it gives a substantial explanation to how the freedom of the individual is possible in the first place. You know, if we paint autonomy against freedom, as in Brown, we are obliged to look for explanations to how does the self comes into being outside of society. So individualists will go look for another authority beyond, society to explain why they are free agents. Nature gave us freedom, the natural freedom, or God gave us free will, or whatever. And so Bookchin explicitly criticizes the archaic notion of natural law that Brown uses, saying that although the concept proved to be useful 200 years ago for revolutions, it is now kind of obsolete. Our second nature, which is socialization, is as important as nature itself in order to consider human freedom. The interaction between this first nature and the second nature in Bookchin, so first and second shouldn't be thought of as better or preceding one another. They both coexist simultaneously, and so this interaction between the two is that one exists as potentiality, like you are born with the potential to be free, that would be the natural freedom. You are, born to manifest your freedom in certain way, and the other is what kind of social organization that would allow us to actualize that potential. So Bookchin doesn't reject that we have inherent freedom, but the claim that freedom comes from somewhere else than our society. And therefore the social world is not the obstacle to freedom, but it is its own very condition. Quote, by creating straw collectivists who are hardline mechanists, Brown rhetorically counterposes a mysteriously and autogenetically constituted individual on the one hand with an omnipresent, presumably oppressive, even totalitarian collective on the other. So, what is more appropriate, according to Bookchin, when it comes to understanding freedom is the following. What freedom, independence, and autonomy people have in a given historical period is the product of a long social tradition and, yes, a collective development, which is not to deny that individuals play an important role in that development. Indeed, they are ultimately obliged to do so if they wish to be free. So to this extent, Bookchin offers the conditions needed for freedom, and any social program needs to acknowledge them and their role in producing as well as securing social freedom. It rests partly on biological facts, as anyone who has raised a child knows, partly on social facts, as anyone who lives in a community knows, and contrary to social constructionists, partly on the interaction of environment and inborn personal proclivities, as any thinking person knows. So this is what we lose when we depict the individual as opposed rather than resulting from societies. These are the things that we lose, and so failing to see this, the only thing we do is make sure that the chasm between autonomy and freedom only becomes unbridgeable. So this schism between autonomy and freedom leads therefore anarchists to be unable to produce coherent plans for rational societies. By cutting themselves off society, they also renounce to the tools that society has to offer in order to engineer our freedom. Those tools are defined by Bookchin as the indispensable social moorings that make for what an anarchist might be expected to prize in individuality, reflective powers, which derive in a great part from discourse, the emotional equipment that nourishes rage against unfreedom, the sociality that motivates the desire for radical change, and the sense of responsibility that engenders social actions. So society offers all of those things: reflective powers, reason, discourse, empathy. Lifestyle anarchists renounce to all of this and instead have to embrace the opposite. Quote, lifestyle anarchism today is finding its principal expression in spray can graffiti, postmodernist nihilism, anti-rationalism, neo-primitivism, anti-technologism, neo-situationism, cultural terrorism, mysticism, and a practice of staging Foucauldian personal insurrection, more oriented toward achieving one's own self-realization than achieving basic social change. And so the next figure of lifestyle anarchism that Bookchin criticizes, and who perhaps is the most Foucauldian of all lifestyle anarchists, is Hakim Bey, aka Peter Lambert Wilson. Hakim Bey is a pseudonym, it's not his real name, and in particular his book T.A.Z, the Temporary Autonomous Zones, Ontological Anarchism, Poetic Terrorism, which is described by Bookchin as amid Paeans to chaos, amour fou, wild children, paganism, art sabotage, pirate utopias, black magic as revolutionary action, crime and sorcery, not to speak of commendations of Marxism, Stirnerism. To the call for autonomy is taken to lengths so absurd as to seemingly parody a self-absorbed and self-absorbing ideology. So in this book, Bey, which by the way means chief or prince in Arabic, in his book he sketches his theory of T.A.Z, a temporary autonomous zone, as a form of micro-resistance to power. Like Foucault, the notion of power in Bey takes a cosmic characteristic. So it is so broad that it fringes on the imagination and the simulation. Power itself is seen as a simulation instead of social structures that rely on concrete institutions and political organizations. Why bother to confront a power which has lost all meaning and become sheer simulation? Such confrontations will only result in dangerous and ugly spasm of violence. And so this statement is seen very absurd for Bookchin. To say that power is a simulation, one has to be very cut off from society, right? Like, can you imagine if someone living in Bosnia at the time Bookchin wrote this book hears you say that power is a simulation? Like, I mean, are refugees victims of a simulation? And are those responsible for the crisis that create refugees also living in a simulation? Like, are their problems just a matter of politicians who couldn't listen to, the rhythm of music, as Hakim says? Is it because, the politicians didn't go to Woodstock, who were fooled by their rational ideas, which are just a simulacrum? Here's a direct quote from Bey. The Democrat, the Socialist, the rational ideology are deaf to the music and lack all sense of rhythm. So, not only fascists, but even socialists, democratic societies, are just deaf to the music, I guess. Anyone with a rational plan cannot vibe at a rave, apparently. So, like, Bey is really that meme where you have, the Chad Dodge, and he's like the small defeated one. Like, on the one hand, you have socialists who are like, okay, we need rational planning of society with labor right, equality between the sexes and genders. We need social organization in which technology and education is democratized and distributed fairly, and we have, like, a fair distribution of resources. and we need to have all of those plans based on the needs and abilities of each. And then you have Bay, who was like, no, you need to vibe to the music. So there's a complete disregard to anything that the left that was brought. That's why we started with that essay last time. There is, you reject everything that the left was building, all the traditions and sacrifices that they were making, so that we have a society in which we can enjoy our freedom collectively. And so not only you have to reject all of that, but you also have to display a complete ignorance of all the struggles and social processes won by socialists. Quote, there is a wearisome arrogance in the base dismissal of the rich culture that was created by revolutionaries over the past centuries, indeed by ordinary working people in the pre-rock and roll, pre-Woodstock era. So I mean seriously, imagine that you have a long legacy of political organization and direct confrontation with power, not as a simulation or a cosmic whatever, but you confronted it head on by getting beaten up by the police, thrown in jail. You had the CIA sabotaging your movements, the media demonizing your movements, and you never gave up on theory and social planning, and you know that it works, that no social progress was made by the eccentricities of bourgeois individuals. And then you have this asshole who shows up and he's like, you're all wrong, the key is listening to the music. Like the key, literally the key is to dream. It is to live in your imagination where no one can impose on you anything. In your dreams you are a bey, you are a chief. No one can tell you what to do in your dream. You are an autarch. In there, you are the state, you are the king. Quote, our actions are justified by fiat, and our relations are shaped by treaties with other autarchs. We make the law for our own domains, and the chains of law have been broken. At present, perhaps we survive as mere pretenders, but even so, we may seize a few instants, a few square feet of reality over which to impose our absolute will, our royaume. L'État, c'est moi. So the state is me. If we are bound by any ethics or morality, it must be one which we ourselves have imagined. So, in reality, you're always oppressor or oppressed. When people leave their dream, they enter into the simulacrum of power. As such, by staying in the dream, then your autonomy is guaranteed. In your dream, you make your own ethics, your own morality, and you answer to no one. So stay in your dream. The dream is more real than reality, which is reduced to a simulacrum. Quote, a democratic dream, a socialist dream, impossible, intones the Bey with overbearing certainty. In dream, we are never ruled except by love or sorcery. So we cannot count all the contradictions that the Bey's conception is filled with. Like on the one hand, power is a simulation, but on the other hand, reality is in dreams. Like, how does that even work? But the most troubling thing is that the base anarchism is a regression that sends back socialist thought to its starting point. Socialists had always been the enemy of idealism, the philosophy that says that there is no reality beyond one's subjectivity. All of reality is just ideas contained within the mind of the perceiver. And socialists were always clear that the root of idealism is individualism. And also the root of individualism is also idealism. Both of these doctrines always go hand in hand. And of course, individualism is a bourgeois philosophy, like the philosopher Charles Mills says that if you doubt that the real world exists or not, and if you're not sure, if you doubt if there is reality, then you probably never been whipped. You probably never been a slave. You never had to work in a factory, never had to worry if your baby is going to survive next winter, and so you never thought that it would make sense to revolt and build societies in which babies can survive winters, and where no one can sell another human being, for example, or that no one has to die of exhaustion on assembly lines. Le Bey, for example, never had to sell his own skin or sell his organs. You know, he has more than his ego as a property. You know, he is not the king of only his dream, but he also has some power over the real world that grants him that he never have to prostitute his children to feed them or to pay off debt. So as Bookchin writes, unfortunately, far too many people in this world do not even own their own skins, as prisoners in chain gangs and jails can attest in the most concrete of terms. No one has ever floated out of the earthly realm of misery on a politics of dreams except the privileged petit bourgeois. So Bookchin criticizes Bey on similar points. If the libertarian individualism of the Bey is like Stirner's, then the ego is its own property. Bookchin says that to get to that point, you either must accept that you can live your life like a martyr who is completely detached of all material possessions, like, you know, Diogenes or a Christian hermit, or you don't have any worries about losing material possessions. But if the nomadic lifestyle that the Bey is recommending has worked for some ancient philosophers and Christian hermits, none of them could actually change anything in their cities. Nomadic lifestyle in cities actually stems from a political impotence, and it wasn't because it's a thrilling adventure like the Bey says. Quote, the Bey's disciples can enjoy the fleeting privilege of living a nomadic existence, for homelessness can, in a sense, be a virtue and adventure. Alas, homelessness can be an adventure when one has a comfortable home to return to, while nomadism is the distinct luxury of those who can afford to live without earning their livelihood. The few gypsy types who seem to enjoy the life of the road were idiosyncratic at best and tragically neurotic at worst. So like most people don't really share the thrill of living inside a Jack Kerouac novel, but the Bey takes it as granted that whomever follows his enlightened prescription will find virtue and their personal autonomy. So instead, Bey, from his ivory tower, sheds his idealistic wisdom, which is always followed with a taste, followed by a taste of elitism. He sees reality, but those socialists, he is aware of reality. He sees reality as it is, but those socialists who know the smell of dust from breathing it every day in factories, they don't know what reality is. They don't know that reality is but a dream. You know, and in this dream, the socialists are the idealists, of course, because they have to leave the scene for the Bey to claim his throne. Thus are the dreams of a new world evoked by centuries of idealists in great revolutions, magisterially reduced by the Bey to the wisdom of his febrile dream world. So Bookchin isn't using the term idealist in its metaphysical sense here, but rather in the common sense, meaning visionaries, ambitions, and hopeful activities, who have, activists who have spent centuries studying and militating. But philosophically speaking, the position of the Bey is idealism, in its pure sense, and we can say that from Bey's perspective, it's the socialists who are idealists. But confusing terms is not rare in individualistic thinking, since it also comes with a lack of nuance, often a sign of great arrogance. The Bey seems to be using terms interchangeably when nuance and precision is required. Quote, as to an anarchism that is all cobwebby with ethical humanism, free thought, muscular atheism, and crude fundamentalist Cartesian logic, forget it. Not only that's preposterous, since it is cutting anarchism, socialism, revolutionary movements from its theoretical roots, which is the Enlightenment. Bookchin adds, he mixes apples like the fundamental Cartesian logic with oranges like free thought and muscular humanism, as though they were interchangeable or necessarily presuppose each other. So not only the Bay displays a lack in mastering philosophical concepts, his individualism also leads to a paradoxical hypocrisy. Proclaiming that anarchy knows no dogma, the Bay nonetheless immerses his readers in a harsh dogma if there ever was one. Anarchism ultimately implies anarchy, and anarchy is chaos. So the dogma is that it goes against everything anarchist thought against. The assertion that anarchy is chaos was never uttered by social and serious anarchists. Quite the contrary, anarchists always said that anarchy is order but minus power. But the Bay goes as far as making his own ungrounded definition of anarchy, since he severed anarchism from its political history and imposes the definition that he pulled out from his dream, in which his dad never lets him go to a rock concert, because his dad, being authoritative, always talks in the name of order and responsibility. Therefore, if Bay is an anarchist, then anarchy has to be against order. It has to be chaos. And so what is this helpful for, except reinforcing the stereotype that the Bay's dad had about anarchists, that they are chaotic, that they are living in living in the present mentality shit, like they are irresponsible, they are narcissistic, egoistic, and self-absorbed. And as much as I wouldn't care for the right-wing dad who just cares about his kid getting a good job, and when jobs are more and more insecure, he puts more pressure on the kids to be more competitive, rather than saying maybe there is something wrong about the economic system here, and maybe I should support socialist program that can guarantee that my son and my neighbor's son wouldn't have to compete to the death for a decent standard of living. The Bay, he targets socialists, saying that their work for revolution and rational society for better tomorrows is just bullshit, and we have to just retrieve in our dreams and be the monarchs we truly are, and just make alliances with other monarchs. Quote, there is no becoming, no revolution, no struggle, no path, if already you're the monarch of your own skin. Your inviolable freedom awaits to be completed only by the love of other monarchs. A politics of dream, urgent as the bluest of sky. Words that could be inscribed on the Newark Stock Exchange as a credo for egotism and social indifference. Indeed, the Bay's approach discredits any movement, any organization, any social upheaval. It is a wrapped, perfect gift for the right wings, because now by the own standards of the left, workers cannot form unions, because it is futile. All movements can do is first to renounce the name movement, because where's the individual in movement? As there is no I in team, right? Instead, you do what Foucault said, you do insurrections. And that's what a T.A.Z is. It's a zone in which, for a moment, for a small instant, you experience your autonomy. The Bay would drink wine and have a private epiphany, which suggests little more than mental masturbation, free to be sure from the constraints of Cartesian logic. So there are no social goals to achieve, no society to replace, no revolution, no social freedom, just the personal feeling that for a moment you were autonomous. By acting crazy, by doing something random, by writing a graffiti on a wall, by peeing on a church wall, by dancing at an event about a cause in which no debate will take place, no critique, no theory, no knowledge is to be shared or produced. And so, and the Bay admits this, like he admits it head on, like it's not a misunderstanding of what he means or anything. He actually says that a T.A.Z. has no involvement with the political. The T.A.Z. is like an uprising which does not engage directly with the state. It's a guerrilla operation which liberates an area of land, of time, of imagination, and then dissolves itself to reform elsewhere else when before the state can crush it. So in a T.A.Z. we can realize many of our true desires, even if only for a season, a brief pirate utopia, a warped free zone in the old space-time continuum. So this is an anarchist talking, telling you to be as apolitical as possible, to the point that it must avoid taking any risk to turn into a movement. Like a T.A.Z. is and should always be an individual insurrection, and it must be very brief. Like if the insurrection is made by a group, always keep it a very small group and make sure that the insurrection doesn't last. As a matter of fact, so transient, so evanescent, so ineffable is a T.A.Z. in contrast to the formidable stable state and bourgeoisie, that as soon as the T.A.Z. is named, it must vanish. It will vanish, only to spring up again somewhere else. So you cannot get more guerrilla than this. You know, if the T.A.Z. is to be a tool of political resistance at best, it can only hope that it will scare the oppressors, because they won't know when or where the next insurrection is going to hit. Like this is its only benefit. You know, it's here to, I mean, it hopes to terrorize the bad guys if they're really, you know, terrorized, right? Because let's face it, I mean, no Republican and even no asshole Democrat is scared by a T.A.Z. You know, a T.A.Z. doesn't make the government shit its pants because the base says it. I mean, that the T.A.Z. is not after the state. You know, he pointedly departs from the usual rhetoric about overwhelming the government. Instead, he prefers the mercurial nature of uprisings, which he believes provide moments of intensity that can give shape and meaning to the entirety of life. So what a T.A.Z. is after is that an individual, he or she, can briefly experience total freedom. So to tell a woman, for example, that you are going to overthrow patriarchal regimes, but that she can have, that you're not, sorry, to tell a woman that you're not going to overthrow patriarchal regimes, but that she can have a T.A.Z., that for a brief moment here and there she can experience total freedom, or you tell a black guy that you are not going to overthrow white supremacy, but that from now and then you can have a brief moment of total freedom, you can only understand why this is, like we said, you know, in the beginning, it's just going to seduce some individuals. It's not going to seduce movements, because it can be extremely insulting for the workers and the activists who shed their blood and tears in social movements to get, you know, the small progress that they got. Quote, an Austrian worker uprising of February 1934 and the Spanish Civil War of 1936, I can attest, were more than orgiastic moments of insurrection, but were bitter struggles carried on with desperate earnestness and magnificent elan, all aesthetic epiphanies notwithstanding. So it is the same thing. So it is the same thing with the Black Panther Party, for example. Like, black activists were not looking for aesthetic expressions or temporary autonomy, but for revolutionary changes. But with base T.A.Z., black people can't make political parties or demonstrate on the street unless, you know, it's a musical or an entertaining show that shouldn't last for long. Women can't march on the street with rational demands. LGBT communities can't organize themselves and promote political programs. All that people can do now is just personal insurrections. So don't organize, just vandalize randomly and then go home. Don't argue with your college professors or publish papers criticizing, criticizing their work. Occupy the classroom for a few hours and shout slogans. Bring speakers that will, make it harder for a conference to be held. Like, and that way you can show them, like, that's it, like that. Behold the power of the left, the power of kings, of the bays. And yeah, if the Bay thinks that he's seen as a king, he's most likely seen as a kid throwing a tantrum, who's not at all aware of social realities. And this worries Bookchin because if the term anarchist becomes co-opted by this narcissistic bourgeoisie, anarchism would lose all of its substance and would not be regarded as a threat at all. That's why we said that it was safe earlier. Quote, the bourgeoisie has nothing whatever to fear from such lifestyle declamations. With its aversion for institutions, mass-based organizations, its largely subcultural orientation, its moral decadence, its celebration of transience, and its rejection of programs, the base ecocentric anarchism, with its postmodernist withdrawal into individualistic autonomy, Foucauldian limit experiences, and neo-situationist ecstasy, threatens to render the very word anarchism politically and socially harmless. So seeing anarchy as chaos doesn't make anarchy dangerous for those in power. It just makes it inoffensively pathetic. Like peeing on a church is not offensive, it's actually pathetic. And this is where we are going to stop today. Next time we will look at other consequences of lifestyle anarchism when they attack civilization altogether, and especially technology, and what are the consequences of that on democratic life. Thank you, and I will see you next week.